I remember one magical day, just like it was yesterday at Crapshoot Palace, where I played 7 hours straight and all I could do was win. By the time I finally called it a day, I was up over $25,000, and let me tell you, the backoff came immediately the next time I walked into Crapshoot Palace. Sometimes it's better to shear the sheep rather than slaughter it. If you've got a local casino, you may want to preserve it as long as possible as a card counter. But how do you make a casino last? Don't casinos kick out card counters? What should you try? And more importantly, what do you need to avoid doing in order to stay in their good graces as long as possible? When I started as a card counter, I had a really small bankroll, but fortunately for me, I got a little lucky, started winning right away, but then I teamed up with 2 other friends and we joined up our bankroll. We played all these small casinos in Washington State with $100 limits, but that was totally fine for us and our bankroll size. But as our collective bankroll grew from $11,000 to $20,000 to $30,000, all of a sudden we were able to start playing some of these larger casinos with higher limits. There's one particular casino, let's call it Crapshoot Palace, that was the closest option to me that had these higher limits, so I started going there every day. Table games opened at 10 a.m., so I'd show up right at 10 a.m., get a coffee and donut from the deli, and then sit there and watch them wash and shuffle the cards and open up the table. Then I'd sit down and clock in to work. But let's just say clocking in at the tables every day, day after day, isn't a good look. It's going to arouse suspicion, and eventually they're going to wonder, what is this guy doing here every day? No casino will let you play forever, and eventually they're going to figure out you're a card counter, or at least suspect that you're up to something, and politely or not so politely refuse to let you play anymore. This may not be that big of a deal if your plan is to just drive to the next casino a few towns away and burn each casino down, moving from town to town. But what about the casinos near where you live? A very common conversation I have with newer card counters is them lamenting to me about how they just got backed off from their local casinos. I ask some more details, and almost every time it comes down to some of the same mistakes that they make. And while I shake my head, I can't judge them too harshly because I made some of those exact same mistakes with my local casinos when I started. What were those mistakes? Let's jump right in. When I talk to these young card counters who lost their locals, it's fairly common they made the same mistake. Sure, you're eager and you want to start putting to work this skill that you've mastered, but going to the casino 7 days or 7 nights a week is really going to stand out. There's generally 2 approaches to how you want to attack a local casino. One is to simply be forgettable, in which case being there 7 nights a week is not forgettable. The other is to actually invest in getting to know the pit bosses and the dealers and building rapport, but at the same time, what is your backstory if you're there 7 nights a week? The only people going to a casino 7 nights a week are grandmas, problem gamblers, and APs. And unless you look like a grandma, you don't want to have to hope and pray that they assume you're a problem gambler. So I showed up at Crapshoot Palace, the same shift every day. That was my first mistake. But there are 2 things that stick out to a casino more than anything if you're a card counter. The first one is a big bet spread. At Crapshoot Palace, I was so excited that I could now play $250 table limits that I was going from one spot of a minimum bet to multiple spots of $250. EV, baby. As you can imagine, that's going to stick out to the casino. Am I saying you should never use a big bet spread? No, of course not. If anything, I've got the reputation as the guy saying everyone should use big bet spreads and make the casinos back you off. And in general, I believe that. That's the way that my blackjack teams and I and my friends have made a ton of money as card counters. The bottom line is that big bet spreads stand out. If I'm on the road, I'm gonna go after that EV, backoffs be damned. But if you wanna milk your local casino and not butcher it, you might wanna consider whether a smaller bet spread might be worthwhile to extend your time at that casino. At this point, I'm showing up at Crapshoot Palace every single day using this table minimum to table maximum bet spread, and they haven't backed me off, so all is not lost. However, I'm starting to get pit bosses glaring at me and dealers asking, so what do you do for work and what are you doing here every day? But I've got the social awareness of Michael Scott.
If luck weren't involved, I would always be winning.
There's a skill you will have to develop as a card counter if you want longevity, and that's your Spidey Senses. Not every phone call in the pit is about you, and not every time a pit boss comes over to the table and starts watching are they looking at you and assuming you're a card counter. But if you don't develop the ability to sense heat in the casino, your time is limited. This is all the more important at your local casino. If you've got heat and you want to get out of there and preserve this place for another day, have your Spidey Senses up, get out there, live to fight another day in the casino. Now that I'm getting some heat at Crapshoot Palace, other than not showing up every single day or not using a min to max bet spread, I still have a few options. One of the best things I could have done is make a mental note of where the heat is coming from and avoid those pit bosses or dealers. There was another local casino, let's call it Retirement Ridge Casino, where I took 6 figures from them. And much of the profits came after I started initially getting some heat or even some countermeasures like getting half shoe. But I knew exactly which pit bosses would half shoe me, and I avoided them like the plague. I would either play in a different pit, or if there was no avoiding them, I just wouldn't play Retirement Ridge that night. Look, there are 3 shifts and 7 nights a week that you can play a casino. If there's a particular suit who's giving you heat, just avoid them and don't play the casino their night or their shift. I mentioned that I've made all but one of these common mistakes at my local casino Crapshoot Palace, but I want to get to the one that I haven't made, that I've seen happen quite a bit. Sometimes the back off doesn't actually come from your play, but another AP that you get associated with. I know it can be exciting if you spot another AP in the wild, but if you do, avoid interacting with them in public. If you sit down at their table, excuse yourself and find another table. If they sit down at your table and they don't leave, it's still worth excusing yourself from that table. They may bring unwanted attention to you, and it's just not worth the heat. If you want a chance to perhaps meet them and exchange information, you can use the classic line, "I'm going to take a break," and then head to the closest bathroom. If the other counter has any sense and they also want to meet you, then they'll meet you in the nearest bathroom where there are no cameras. Then you can swap numbers and meet up at a coffee shop or some other restaurant away from the casino's watching eyes. But if that other card counter ends up getting backed off and they saw the two of you talking together or playing together, they're going to assume that you're Confederates, and you're going to get backed off simply by association. I told you there are 2 things that bring more attention to card counters than anything, the first of them being a big bet spread. Well, the other one, probably the biggest one, is a big win. Nothing stands out to a casino more than big wins. Shift supervisors do not want to have a big loss on their night. And so while over 99% of people that win big are just getting lucky, these shift supervisors freak out about wins more than anything else. I would have been smarter to win that $25,000 over 5 different sessions than all at once if I wanted that casino to last. But what exactly happens during these backoffs? I'm going to show you everything you need to know about getting banned in this video.